Hi, I'm John Lenart. Welcome to The Honest Pour. In 2016, I started The Honest Pour as an audio-only podcast. Over the next 3 years, I interviewed 75 winemakers from around the world to find out what connects them to their wines and what makes their wines special and unique. If you want to check out any of those episodes, you can go back and listen to them on thehonestpourpod.com or any of your favorite podcast aggregators. Well, now I'm restarting that podcast. I'm starting it out as a video podcast now, so sort of an Honest Pour 2.0. Please join along, follow me, subscribe to the podcast, and enjoy the show. Hi, welcome to The Honest Pour. I'm John Lenart. Joining me today is Hailey Hartford Murray with Hartford Family Winery. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. So excited to be here.
So, you literally grew up in the Vineyard.
I did.
You got some family connections, a name people might know.
Yep.
Tell me how you grew up.
Sure. So I grew up when my parents first moved to Russian River Valley. They bought a little ranch house that had 100-year-old zin vines in the backyard. And so I grew up on that little property, but we had been involved in the wine business for a number of years already. My parents actually met in law school, though. My mom thought that she would be following in her father's footsteps, becoming an attorney.
Your grandfather is?
Jess Jackson.
Jackson.
Founder of Kendall Jackson
right.
Winery. So,
little retirement project.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and it was really cool. Actually, just recently we found some old papers that were tucked away in a closet or a drawer up at the original Kendall Jackson Winery, and it was little notes that he had scribbled that said 5 hens and a horse and a goat and
wow.
and this is going to be named Moonshine Vineyard. It was some pretty interesting romantic names at the time, and that was his original little sketch of a plan. But so his ambitions were greater than just a retirement project.
Clearly.
And so my mom started out in those really early days before the winery was known at all, selling wine. And so she traveled all across the country selling wine for Kendall Jackson. And my dad, Don Hartford, so my mom is Jenny, my dad is Don, and my dad ended up practicing law for over 20 years, and partway through that moved into the wine business, and so he became legal representative, legal counsel for the winery, for Kendall Jackson, and then became interested in other regions. For Kendall Jackson, we were sourcing from some of the coolest climate vineyard sites all throughout California, and he really came to appreciate each individual region. And so in the early 90s, he approached my parents and expressed that his dream was to have an estate, world-recognized estate in every world-recognized region, every great region that was,
wow.
So not a little ambitious, not a man of low ambitions. And so he said, he came to my parents and he said, would you be interested in helping me with this project? I can't really do it alone. So he wasn't, he recognized that it was going to take a lot of work. And they said, yeah, we'd love to. And they chose Russian River as their spot. So it was in 1994 that we had our first. We released our first vintage for the winery. 1993 was the first harvest that we picked, and for Hartford Family Winery. And so from the very beginning, Hartford Family Winery was based in Russian River Valley, and focusing on single vineyard designated wines, and so wines from one little vineyard site. And in those early 90s, there weren't a lot of producers that were doing single vineyard designated wines, and sort of replicating the Burgundian model of small terroir expressive sites. And so we were sort of foundational in that little movement. And of course now there's many wineries that have single vineyards, but we started out with just the 4, and over the years we've explored many different areas and have expanded outside of Russian River, although majority of the wines we make are from there. We now have wines from as far north as Oregon that we make, and then as far south as Santa Rita Hills.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about this single vineyard focus.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me. I love the idea of single vineyard focus because you really get to express terroir, right?
Exactly.
You really get to taste what this land is about.
Yeah.
The downside of single vineyard is you just can't produce enough quantity, right?
Yeah.
There's a little bit of a challenge to feed the market. When you're making great wines, people want it, and sometimes that's a good thing because your prices will go up. But sometimes it's just people stop trying to get it because it's just never available.
Yeah, exactly. It's a balance that you have to make. You have to walk, and I think the thing that is really so exciting, to me personally and to our family about single vineyard wines is that you work with a vineyard for a number of years, and we sort of think about it in that when we approach a new vineyard site, we'll see first, does it make delicious wine? And that's the first criteria. If it makes delicious wine, is it just delicious, or is there something extra interesting about it that makes it distinctive from any of the other wines we might already be making, or that we've tried, from other producers? And then if it does have that extra special something, was it just the fluke of that year's vintage, or is there something consistent that's being driven by that site, by the climate, by the terroir, by the aspect of the vineyard, by the way the sun hits it, by the soils in the site. And if it meets all of those criteria, and usually it takes a couple of years of us bringing the fruit in, working with the vineyard, testing it out, and is it just, is it the whole vineyard, or is it just a little block of the vineyard, or these 3 blocks? And we're not afraid to narrow it down to that sharp of a focus if it really helps us to make an even better wine or more exciting wine. And they all have, we like to say, we're looking for wines with personality or, extreme personality. Yeah. And so, oftentimes it's also in sort of a high risk, high reward area, and we'll taste some wines in a little bit. And one of the vineyards in particular is very much that way, that's on the table. But, some years, the years that you can make it are amazing, and other years, you just take the risk that you can't make it because the climate's too extreme. But all of that's to say, we don't mind making a little bit smaller quantity of any particular vineyard if it means that it's...
Yeah, right, it's just a small quantity. Here's a small quantity here.
Yeah, exactly.
How many vineyards are estate vineyards?
Well, the majority of our wines are estate vineyards. So we make, I said, we started out with just the 4 single vineyards, and over the years, as we've explored those different AVAs, and I guess I should say too, our main varietals are Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Old Vine Zinfandel. So those are sort of our core wines, our core varietals. And over the years of exploring these different sites, we've now grown to make over 32 single vineyards. That's just the single vineyards, and they're all as we talked about, they're all very small case quantity, so it's only about 300 cases on average for each of those bottlings. So 32 really small bottlings. And then we have our Russian River Valley tier, which is a Chardonnay, a Pinot, and a Zin, and then we have a middle tier, and we'll taste one of those wines today too.
So you have some that are not necessarily single vineyard wine.
So it's multiple vineyard blends. Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's great. And is your focus is your market mostly in the restaurant world, wine shops, direct to consumer? Yeah,
well, it would be the majority of our wines are sold direct to consumer, in our tasting room, and particularly true for the single vineyards. But we leave, about 100 of those 300 cases to spread across the world. And what we do is we send different single vineyards to different markets. So you'll find Hartford in almost any major wine market. But it might be a different single vineyard, so for here.
Yeah, well, if you're only making 300 cases.
Yeah. So
New York could take it all, and that's it.
Yeah, exactly. And we want New York to share. So that's sort of our approach. So it's almost like a treasure hunt looking for the single vineyards, but you will find some representative of the winery each place.
Does the focus on single vineyard present any unique challenges in the whole process? Yeah,
every step of the way, which makes it, I think, more exciting too, in a way. So we bring, even for our Russian River Valley wines, which are blends of multiple vineyards, and often, usually we use our own single vineyards first. We use specific blocks that we think are just absolutely delicious and play really well and represent, the Russian River region as a whole. So we'll bring even the Russian River vineyards and those blocks in separately, ferment them separately every step of the way, treat them as if they were a single vineyard, in terms of all the little decisions that are made throughout the winemaking process, little tweaks that we make in terms of the barrels used or the toasting level for that specific site, because we never want our winemaking decisions to cover or hide the personality that we've come to really know and love of the vineyard site. So we're wanting to make sure that if we make a decision in the winemaking process, it's helping to highlight what we've already come to love about it. So we hope that the first thing you notice when you taste our wines isn't the oak, or it isn't, really big, harsh tannins. It's things, we hope those things are there, maybe, or, tannin is there. The oak might still be there. We do use French oak on all of our wines. But we hope that it's very integrated and complementing to, the...
Well, I read somewhere you've got a commitment to sustainability. Let's talk a little bit about that and what that particularly brings to the wine.
Yeah. So for us, we've been farming sustainably for a long time now, and doing a lot of those practices, before it was really called, sustainable. But it's important to us, especially as a family-owned company, both for Jackson Family Wines, but also for Hartford Family Winery. We're hoping that, we have this generation and then our next generations will want to continue to be involved in the wine business. And if that's the case, we want to make sure that the land, the vineyards that we're growing, our grapes in, are being able to last, as long as possible. And we often find that the oldest vineyards create some of the most beautiful, interesting wines. And so trying to make sure that we're using, all of our vineyards are certified sustainable. I think it's called the CCSW.
It's always changing.
And we'll be starting to put that on the back label for the first time in the next bottling, which is exciting for us. We're also part of International Wineries for Climate Action, which is an organization that looks at It's an association of wineries globally that have committed to reducing, carbon emissions and a whole host of sustainability goals and water usage and throughout the vineyards as well as winemaking process, and even in terms of bottling, all of that. Really trying to make sure that we're being responsible at every stage of the winemaking and consumption process even.
And how far do you go with it? Do you do any biodynamic practices? Or?
Yeah, in some vineyards, we have a couple of biodynamic, but what we're more interested in right now is regenerative farming, and so we're starting to use in each of the vineyard sites, regenerative farming, which includes, we've invested in as a family, a larger family, we've invested in a herd of sheep, and so the sheep are now grazing in the vineyards.
Back to the notes.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, grazing in the vineyards. We've got a little flock of chicken too, and so they help with the.
They leave their behind.
They leave their trail, and it helps with the vine health, and we're doing more and more to try and measure soil health because we find that strong healthier soils, more biodiverse soils too. So making sure that it's not, if we're using a cover crop, it's not a monotype cover crop. There's a great diversity, and then that helps bring in, new healthy bugs and healthy bacteria and all of it, which helps in terms of the quality.
And taking the biodynamics the whole way, the burying of the horns, and
so
you're doing the whole kit and caboodle, huh?
Yeah, there's one vineyard, one of our Zinfandel vineyards that we've done that in, and but I think we've started leaning more towards the regenerative.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
That's great. So when we come back, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to taste through some wines and talk about the sustainable regenerative wines of Hartford Family. Hey, before we get on with the tasting segment, what I'd like you to do is do me a favor and click the subscribe button. Now, I'm never going to ask you for a donation. I always think this podcast should come free to you. I won't ask you to join a Patreon group or send me any money, but please click subscribe. When you click subscribe, the channel's going to grow. And as the channel grows, I'll be able to offer you some exciting benefits. Right now, I've only got a couple hundred members. If we get to 500, that's when the things are going to start. And at 1,000, it's even going to get better. So please click subscribe below. Now, back to the tasting. All right, welcome back. I'm here with Hailey Hartford Murray, and we are about to do some tasting. So all the wines we're going to taste today are going to be from the 2021 vintage. Tell me about 2021. How was it?
It was a really nice vintage. It was warm. It was beautiful. We had a lot of, let me see, in 22, we had tons of rain and flooding. It's not uncommon for us at Hartford. We're in a really pretty spot in Russian River Valley. You drive over a little tiny bridge over the Green Valley Creek in order to get to our tasting room and our winery location, and we're sort of in a little bowl surrounded by beautiful redwood trees.
So you're on the west side then?
Yeah. So if you go, we're just north of the town of Sebastopol, and we're due west of Highway 101 in Santa Rosa, by maybe 10 miles or so. So yeah, it's a really pretty spot within Russian River Valley, but because of that little Green Valley Creek, when it rains, we often flood. So we've had a couple of really wet years. This last, the winter of 22 into 23 was particularly wet. We had lots of flooding, and if I remember correctly, the winter of 21 into 22 was similar. It wasn't quite as bad as this last year, but so lots of wet weather in the winter, but nice growing season. There were a couple of little heat spikes, which were nice. They helped to ripen the fruit, but overall, it was a pretty non-eventful vintage for us.
Which is not a bad thing for being in the wine world.
Yep, exactly.
All right, so what are we going to taste?
We have 2 Chardonnays and we have 3 Pinot Noirs that we're tasting today. The first Chardonnay is our Russian River Valley Chardonnay. We made the wine, we started out with the winery just with the single vineyards, and a lot of producers sort of did that inverse. They started with their Russian River Valley blend or their blend wine, first, and we didn't start making this until about 12, 13 years ago. And really, as you sort of expressed, once wines, the single vineyard wines come into market, it's only 10 6-packs because we sell them in 6-bottle cases. So it's only about 10 6-packs for a given market. And once those 6-packs are gone, they're gone, and until the next vintage. And so it was hard to go to, and make new friends by saying, I wish you could have, but sorry, no. And so we didn't like to say no as much. And so we started making the Russian River Valley blend, to be able to have a wine that could be offered more consistently by the glass and by the bottle in restaurants, and carried
by the glass.
Yep. Yeah, even by the glass. And it's actually done really well for us, both the Chardonnay and the Pinot Noir that we're going to taste, because I think Russian River is such a beautiful region for Chardonnay and Pinot, of course, and stylistically, I think this wine, our wine in particular, sits at a really beautiful point in the spectrum of Chardonnays, and I think similar with the Pinot Noirs. We hope, what we're looking for when we choose which vineyards or blocks to use are ones that have, all of our favorite attributes of a great Russian River Valley Chardonnay. So we look for that note of citrus, so lemon peel, even orange blossom, sort of floral aromatics. There's a clone of Chardonnay that was developed by the Ruud family that lived in Russian River Valley, and that has very floral notes.
This is a lot of floral notes.
Yeah. So we use a small percentage of it. It can be really overwhelmingly jasmine when you use 100% wine. We use a small percentage so it becomes more orange blossom or honeysuckle even.
Yeah, honeysuckle for sure. There's golden delicious apple.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of beeswax. And then, like you said, that orange blossom and honeysuckle for sure are in there.
Yeah, and then
it's not that flabby Chardonnay you might think of. It's not by any means oaky. There's a hint, but it's more like a spice rather than
a little bit of
standout.
Yeah, sometimes I think of it, and partly because of the minerality in a couple of vineyard sites. One vineyard in particular tends to lend almost a crystallized ginger minerality. So it's got a little bit of spice, a little bit of mineral, and it makes it just really delicious.
So when this wine is being made, are you looking for a wine that is like non-vintage champagne that's consistent from vintage to vintage, or are you looking for, we're going to bring the same kind of blend together and see what that gives us in this vintage.
Yeah, having worked with each of these vineyards for so many years, we sort of know what to expect from most of the sites, but then you have the vintage variation, and so we are trying to make it consistent. There's certain things, like some of the attributes I described, that we're always looking to try and make sure that they're there, because we think that they're very special and make the wine delicious, and again are representative of the region. But so I guess it's yes, and we do a little bit of both. So we're trying to make sure that it's the most delicious wine for that vintage. So sometimes we'll use certain blocks, bigger percentage, or sections of vineyards, blocks of vineyards, greater percentage or less, depending on how strong they are that vintage and what happened in the vineyard sites. But we are trying to make sure that it also is a style that our consumers will recognize.
Sure.
Yeah.
And what's the retail on it, do you know?
Yeah, so it's about $35.
Okay,
yeah,
so in that kind of, it might not be a wine for Tuesday night dinner, but it's a wine for maybe Friday night.
Yeah, exactly.
Dinner.
Yep, 35 to 40 in some retail shops, I bet.
Sure, let's give it a taste.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow, I love the complexity.
Thanks.
I love that it's not so crazy fruit forward.
Yeah, what we're really hoping for this wine is balance, and I think I started to say, I think on the spectrum of Chardonnays, this sits in a really nice middle point, so it becomes a real crowd pleaser, because people who want the racier style of Chardonnay, something with higher acid, leaner, more mineral driven, there's still, because Russian River is such a cool growing climate, the fog rolls in every evening, acts like a little refrigerator and keeps the grape cool, you retain that acidity. So there's a lot of acidity to really fall in love with here. But those who like a richer bodied, even towards the buttery, oaky style.
Yeah, there's a little bit of richness.
Yeah, there's texture here that helps to give you that mouthfeel without losing the acidity.
And I think that's part of the Russian River's beauty, is there is that kind of balance. It's not so cool as like the coastal vineyards.
Sites. And we have a couple of those.
But it's not warm like as you start to get up the mountainside, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's really pretty wine. If you're looking for my tasting notes, be sure to check in the comments below.
Yeah. I've always loved that Chardonnay. Yeah.
All right, what's next?
So now we have our Stone Cote Chardonnay. I have that bottle in front of us here too. But Stone Cote is one of our single vineyard Chardonnays, and one of the earliest Chardonnays that we have been making for the winery. It's part of the historic Durrell Vineyard, which was one of the very first Chardonnay vineyards to be made into single vineyard wine. And so this site, the Stone Cote site, was named because Cote is French for hillside, if I understand. I don't speak French, but and the stones that are found throughout it. So it's an uplifted riverbed from hundreds of years ago, and you walk around this vineyard and you'll see stones the size of grapefruits all throughout it. They've we drive around that little area, and everyone's built little rock walls from all of the stones that they find. But it brings a really lovely minerality, and this is one of my favorite Chardonnays because it's sort of surprising as you take a sip of it. It starts out pretty broad, I'd say, on the palate, and really interesting sort of fruit profile in this wine, also named for more of the stone fruit that we find in it. You do get a little of that lemon, citrus, but it's more white peach or nectarine. We find vintage to vintage. And then enters, sort of soft and broad on the palate, but by the mid palate and towards the end, it has this bright lift of minerality and acidity that wakens the wine back up, and it sort of surprises you. What you think could turn into a flabby wine then becomes something much more interesting. And so it's one of my favorites for that reason.
It's an interesting nose. The minerality is there. It's got that. Yeah. And when I say minerality, it always reminds me of the smell of rain on the sidewalk on a hot summer day. It's definitely got that. Yeah, and there's like an exotic spiciness to the nose somewhere. That I'm finding it's very interesting. Yeah, no,
it does get those really interesting spice notes. Sometimes a little flintiness in the aromatics too, or hazelnut. that we find from that vineyard. We had it paired at a wine club party, this was a number of years ago, with a clam chowder that I think had a little bit of nutmeg in it, and it was just, because it was just bright enough, but also just rich enough that it cut through the creaminess of the clam chowder, and then that hint of nutmeg with the hazelnut aromatic, it just popped it out. So
it's really intriguing. It's like you said, that white peach is really forward there. Mm-hmm. Like if I were blinding this wine, I'd have trouble calling it Chardonnay. Yeah. Not that it's not Chardonnay, but Chardonnay could be so many different things.
Exactly.
This is a different. It's a Chardonnay with personality.
Yeah, we good. Yeah, I know, and I love it when people can come into the tasting room and taste a couple of our Chardonnays side by side, because we really are looking for Chardonnays that are very different from one another, and so we don't have hurt feelings if someone has a favorite, or does, it's not someone's
style or not your style.
Exactly. So for instance, we have our Seascape Vineyard, which is a very coastal vineyard site, and it's locked in fog all growing season. So basically it has a window of about, with the fog, has left, by 11 a.m. and then till about 3 or 4 p.m. Wow. So very short window to get those grapes ripe. And so it's just zippy and lemon, lime, almost like saline, like margarita, and very different in style from this Stone Cote. And it's really fun to be able to taste two wines that are so different, same varietal, and understand, what site, what a place does to the way that the wine tastes in the bottle.
Great. Let's get on the Pinots.
Sure.
And Russian River Pinot is a favorite of mine.
Oh, good. Yeah. Well, we love making it. It's one of our favorites too. And that's the first one that we're starting with. It's the Russian River Valley Pinot Noir. So this is just like the first Chardonnay we tried, a blend of multiple vineyards, often going into our own, single vineyards to make the wine. I think we now work with just 2 outside grower vineyards for the Russian River Pinot. And we feel really grateful that in Russian River Valley, there's so many amazing producers and growers, and we've been there a long time and have really amazing relationships with their families. And so, we wish we could own all of the amazing vineyards in the world, but it's okay that we don't, right? And are really grateful when other producers are willing to share their fruit with us.
Yeah, one thing I like about Russian River Pinot is it tends to scream American Pinot.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really if you're looking for the quintessential American Pinot Noir, go to the Russian River Valley, you're probably going to get it.
Yeah.
You're not going to get Burgundy there.
Yeah, it's not Burgundy, and we don't want to try to make it into that. I think some things that we look for in an excellent Russian River Pinot is beautiful fruit. You get nice, bright, ripe fruit. So lots of cherry, berry, sort of raspberry, aromatics especially. But we think a great Russian River Pinot will also have a hint of earth. And here in this wine, we think it's a little bit more like you're digging in your garden in spring. You get that fresh earth, fresh dirt sort of notion, rather than the composty loamy that some other vineyards can have, or other sites. And so it's sort of that fresh, bright earth underneath those raspberry aromatics. And then we think a lot for Hartford, if there's sort of one winemaking aim or component that we think about, it's I think texture is one thing that we're really striving for, a really pretty texture in the wines, whether that's a softness, or suppleness or a plushness, and not just flabby, not just racy, singular note, and so for this wine, I think a lot of the mouthfeel is driven by the soils throughout the Russian River. There's a huge diversity of soils in Russian River Valley, but the predominant soil is Gold Ridge fine sandy loam. And it's a big mouthful to say, but it's a really pretty soil type and great for growing wine because it's really fluffy. You walk in the vineyard, you take a couple steps, and it puffs around you like this gigantic cloud. And for those who are still young, old enough to remember Snoopy comics, it's sort of like your pig pen, with the cloud of dust around you. And if you're on a vineyard tour, you got to be right on someone's bumper in order to see them. But it's great for growing wine because the water drains straight through it. And so the vines have to reach down really deep to get at the water table, and you end up with smaller berries, not as plump and full of water because they're really struggling to get at it. And you get a little more concentration, and we found that most of the vineyard sites that have this gold ridge soil, they're a little plusher tannin too, and mouthfeel. There's something about how it integrates and where that skin on juice contact and that surface area ratio that ends up driving a really pretty mouthfeel.
Yeah, and it's not like a lush mouthfeel. It's not like you're drinking a Merlot where it's kind of like all like a velvety wrap around you. It's there's a bright acidity to it. The tannins are there, but they're super fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Super fine. That earthiness is there, so we're not so flabby, fruity again.
Exactly.
But the fruit's there, and it's pretty. It's black cherry. There's a little bit of strawberry jam kind of in there.
Yep.
And again, this wine is in the same price point as the other blend?
Yeah, so this will be a little bit slightly higher because it's a
right?
Pinot Noir, so it's closer to about 40, 45.
Okay, so in that same range.
Yeah, exactly. So
great. And what about the single vineyards? Where are they priced?
So they're usually priced retail of about 65 to 70. I think we've moved up to about 70.
So once you get in a restaurant, now you're talking about an investment.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So they're, and they come in, in a wine. Most restaurants will get, maybe 6 bottles, a 6-pack case or to 2 6-pack cases. Sometimes you'll find them, as really fun, like Corv and pours on.
Oh, cool.
On
That's the way to do that one. Yeah.
But yeah, and I think it is. It's your fancy night out wine.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
What's next?
The next wine we have is our Fog Dance Pinot Noir. So this is
where's Fog Dance?
Fog Dance is right in Green Valley of Russian River Valley.
Oh, okay.
So it's its own little AVA that is contained within the borders of Russian River, and it was created as an AVA because it's one of the coolest areas within Russian River, and the soil is more predominantly Gold Ridge. So there's some reasons for those delineations. And so when I talk about Gold Ridge soil, this is sort of the poster child for,
cool.
for that. And it's a really interesting Pinot Noir. One thing we almost always find on it is sort of this, it's hard to describe, but it's almost like a dusty notion on the nose.
There is a dusty notion.
Yeah, and it's like, well, do I like that? Do I not?
That's why I was just thinking that.
Yeah.
I was swirling for a second smell just to make sure it wasn't like,
there? And
did I get a dirty glass?
Yeah, exactly. But it does end up blowing off, and then underneath it, we usually find this really pretty blood orange sort of component to it, which is really interesting. You don't often find. You can find, but you don't often find citrus in a Pinot Noir. And so that always makes it really interesting too. Yeah, and then again, really fine grain pollen to the tannin, really silky. It's probably, I love this Pinot Noir.
This is beautifully integrated.
Thank you.
Standing out.
Yeah, thank you.
The fruit isn't standing out, or the earthiness isn't standing out. The tannin's not standing out. The acid's not standing out. This really just screams balance and integration.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's what we're striving for. We hope that, that, like, again, that those components are there, they're complexing, but it's not, it's not a one note song.
It's not simple.
Yeah, exactly.
Everything's there to keep it interesting, but it's all in balance.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that it's an interesting wine, and this is again a wine that you can pour and early in the day, and then by the end of it, it's evolved in a very different way.
Oh yeah, this wine after being open for 4 hours, I'd like to see what it does.
Yeah, exactly, and it just gets better. It's really pretty, but yeah.
Great, and we have one more wine.
Yep, and so we're finishing with our Land's Edge Pinot Noir. And Land's Edge is sort of our middle tier. Before we started making the Russian River Valley wines, we made our Land's Edge Pinot Noir and our Four Hearts Chardonnay as our first multiple vineyard blends. Land's Edge is a 2 vineyard blend, and vineyard sites that are right on the edge of the coast. So appropriately named. One of those vineyards I talked about a little bit already, our Seascape vineyard. We have both Chardonnay and Pinot Noir planted at that site. And it's right on the edge of the ocean. You literally look over, if it's a clear day, you look over the Bodega Bay, and you can sometimes see all the way out to the Farallon Islands, which are right off the coast of San Francisco. Or the point of San Francisco.
I bet it doesn't get clear enough for that too often.
Not usually, yeah. So that might be
a little too foggy for that.
Yeah, exactly. That's in springtime maybe, when it's still cool enough that the inland temperatures aren't pulling the fog off of the coast. But during the growing season, like I said, it's locked in fog most of the day. And so, you end up with really bright notes of acidity in those, in that single vineyard that we make from that site. Here, I think it blends with the Far Coast fruit, which is the second vineyard we use for this, in a really lovely way. Far Coast is about the same close distance from the ocean. So they're both only about 5 or so miles from the ocean. But it's the second ridge in. So it has, the fog has to go over that first ridge before it reaches the Far Coast vineyard. So you get a little bit riper fruit from that site, a little bit more black cherry driven, really interesting sort of mocha notions sometimes, a nice minerality too though, because the soils are uplifted ancient seafloor from millions of years ago. So you walk around, you find these little cool remnants of fossilized seashells. But I think that minerality integrates with the tannin in a really pretty way in that site. And all of that's to say, we taste those two single vineyards side by side. They're very distinct. Seascape is a little more racy, a little bit.
Yeah, I bet that Seascape on its own is... Yeah, racy is the good word.
Yeah, and also really interesting aromatics on that wine. It's very earthy. The Seascape Pinot Noir tends to be almost like drinking a single malt Scotch. Where it's got that sort of peat moss, earthy, smoky sort of notion. And with this wine, it's toned down because of that that Far Coast fruit. And so instead, to me, it becomes a really lovely rose petal, black tea leaf sort of herbality.
I'm getting some mushroomy notes, some dried mushrooms, not fresh mushrooms. Yeah, I like that idea. Tea is
that
a
black
good descriptor.
Tea leaf. Yep, and that rose petal sort of notion also follows through for me on the palate. And instead of being, all sort of dark cherry fruit, it's got this nice bright high tone. A little more of that almost. Here, I think probably more strawberry, not quite towards the cranberry that Seascape can be, but it brings a brightness to the wine that
I like the balance between the kind of riper and fresher fruits. Well, these are delicious wines. Thank you so much for coming out and showing them to me. If you want to learn more about Hartford Family Wines, I'll leave the link to the website below in the comments, and along with my tasting notes for each of the wines, plus the price per bottle. Hailey, thanks so much for your time. Thanks for showing me the wines, and I look forward to coming to visit you out in the rest of the
we'd love to have you. Thank you so much for having me here in Chicago.